afternoon and welcome to everyone here today to our second webinar in our Energy Transition series, hosted by the Saldanha Bay Innovation Campus, a strategic initiative led by the Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone. Myself, Adinda Preller, a member of the Saldanha Bay Industrial Development Zone executive team, will be your jolly host for today. Now, in February, the Saldanha Bay Innovation Campus launched its first webinar that was focused on special economic zones and smart manufacturing. We learned all sorts of interesting things, such as the differences between smart and advanced manufacturing, the roles of special economic zones, and the role of technology to build and grow industries. Our team will share a YouTube link in case you may have missed this event. Today, we will further explore the energy transition and focus on hydrogen. Hydrogen certainly has been a buzzword lately, and we would like you to leave today with new insights and share in the excitement. Buckle up and hold on to your bunny slippers. This is going to be an immersive session into the world of hydrogen. Over the past year, numerous research reports have been published on the feasibility of a hydrogen industry in South Africa. There are 3 boards that highlighted that Saldanha is possibly an ideal location to establish a hydrogen hub. The 3 reports that I referred to, the first one is the CSIR report, which was commissioned by the EU delegation to South Africa, called the Powerfuels 2, Stimulating Domestic Hydrogen Consumption Opportunities in South Africa. Our keynote speaker, Thomas Roos, will share more on this report and its findings. The second report is the Ricardo report, which was commissioned by the P4G Getting to Zero Coalition, called South Africa, Fueling the Future of Shipping. And our panelist, Katrina, from the Global Maritime Forum, will share more on this report. Last but not least, the third report is the DSI report, which was commissioned by the Department of Science and Innovation and led by industry such as Anglo-American, Bumbly Energy, SunNedi, and Engie, called the South African Hydrogen Value Report. Now, a few things today, I think, as an audience member that we would love you to take home today. The first thing is a broad understanding of the hydrogen value chain, just to have an idea of what the buzz is about. Secondly, is to have a broad understanding of South Africa's advantages and disadvantages to compete in the global hydrogen market. Then, why is Saldanha a good location to establish such a hydrogen industry? And then for all of you to take home perhaps a sense of the timelines, the urgency, the opportunities that can be seized, but also realistically some of the roadblocks that we may have to move to realize such a hydrogen industry. Last but not least, we want all parties to collaborate so that we as Team South Africa can build a new sustainable industry and drive a just energy transition together. Now, before we get started, just a few housekeeping rules as it goes with webinars. Your mics will be muted for the duration of the session. We encourage you to comment and interact in the chat box during the session. Please, if you do have specific questions, add them to the Q&A box. And when we get to the Q&A session, your questions will be directed to the most appropriate panelist. And if you want to ask your question directly, you will have to raise your hand and our magic team behind the scenes will unmute you. Before we commence with our keynote address, as I promised, this is going to be an immersive experience. And we have a few polls every now and again that will pop up onto your screen just to keep you on your toes and your eyes glued to the screen. So our first pop-up should be up now and asking just how did you hear about this webinar? Brilliant. We'll give a second for everyone to complete. And then we're going to be off to the most important part, or to get us started, which is our keynote address. While we wait for the poll to finish, just a bit of structure for today. We're going to start off with our keynote address, followed by a panel discussion, and then we'll have our Q&A session at the end. So just by rule of thumb, almost like 30 minutes allocated to each bit, roughly. Okay, thank you, team. Now, onto our keynote. Thomas, it is a pleasure to have you here today as our keynote speaker. For all around the room, Thomas Roos is a senior research engineer at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. He's not only a subject matter expert on hydrogen, but also Thomas' enthusiasm for hydrogen is infectious and tangible. Thomas, thank you for joining us today. I'm handing the mic straight to you.
Thank you so much. I guess I shall share my screen at this point. And we all set to go. The topic I was given, Saldanha as a potential hydrogen hub, has a number of detailed information points, but there's a lot of context that is required, and it made for quite a difficult planning session for this webinar, because we've had an avalanche of webinars, particularly last year. What do you include and what do you leave out? There's a risk of leaving behind some members of the audience. There's a risk of not giving the audience all the information that they want. So let's see how successful I've been able to be. Let's begin with a proposition. South Africa, as you probably know from the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program, has got a lot of available land, excellent solar resource, and a very good wind resource. This gives rise to a massive, truly massive renewable electricity potential at world competitive costs. But we've got a problem. The potential far exceeds the local electricity demand. And in South Africa, electricity is a contested space. I won't explore that comment over much, but it is a matter of some engagement in the public sector. Who provides what? And of course, whenever you're dealing with what is perceived to be a zero-sum game, you are going to get potentially winners and losers, and that gives rise to some contest. If we don't sell it in country, how about outside? Now, our neighboring economies are smaller than ours, so therefore we cannot sell that much electricity to them. And there's no high voltage DC line to Europe. So what now? But what if we were able to export that renewable electricity as molecules instead of electrons? We can then bypass this constraint and this limitation. So this brings us to some terminology. What are power fuels, PTX, or power to gas, or e-fuels? They're all fuel based on hydrogen, created by the electrolysis of water using renewable electricity. You can see on your screen a broad range. On the far left, your renewable electricity going through the electrolyzer liberates hydrogen from water. And that hydrogen you can either use as is, or you can combine it with CO2 from different sources to create a range of different hydrocarbons, from methane all the way through to longer chain. Alternatively, you can make ammonia for a number of different purposes. And the applications are suggested on the right-hand side. We'll explore that a little bit later. So you may also say, in case you've missed any of the webinars previously, why now? Why are we talking about hydrogen? Surely this is a boat that has sailed, or alternatively, wasn't this something we heard about a decade ago? Why is it re-emerging now? Now, I'd like to put 4 reasons on the table. The first is the climate, regulatory, and financing pressure. We know about the Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement brought us the magic 1.5 degree C limit that we're all aiming for, and 2 degrees as an absolute limit if we can get that right. Closely following that, the European Green Deal, which was what really brought the deadline of 2050 for decarbonization into focus. It's an ambitious target to bring a whole continent to CO2 neutrality by 2050. And this target has been adopted by a number of other industries and stakeholders taking it as a reference. Lastly, there's finance activism. Disappointed with the rate of decarbonization, a lot of activists have taken to the boardrooms, looking at pressurizing financing houses to exit the fossil markets, starting with coal. And the impact of that has been fairly widely felt. The second is that of economics. It used to be that you did renewable electricity because you were a bunny hugger and you were trying to save the planet. Turns out that it might actually be good economic activity as well. In good areas, renewable electricity has been competitive with the mainstream incumbents since about 2014. It's particularly true in South Africa. So new PV and new wind is now at least 40% cheaper than new coal, nuclear, or gas-fired combined cycle turbines. This now means that it's a lower cost form of electricity, even if it is variable in supply, but we can touch on that a little bit later. The third aspect is we can take it as a given that your best and most efficient and lowest cost approach for decarbonization is to use renewable electricity directly. You directly electrify your process. Now, this would be great if it was possible everywhere, but there are some stubborn areas which present us with some difficulties. We call these the hard to abate sectors. And here, Powerfuels gives us some solutions. The hard to abate sectors fall into 2 broad categories. Transport, mostly heavy duty long distance transport. And here we're looking at heavy duty long distance trucks and buses, so road transport. We are looking at commercial aviation and maritime shipping. Rail is a special case. Rail ideally should be electrified anyway, but there are large swaths of the rail network internationally and also in South Africa that are not electrified. And to retrofit an electrification program to install the catenary lines is particularly expensive. So that's why rail has got an asterisk next to it. In industry, we have 4 broad areas: iron and steel. Steel making produces a significant amount of CO2, primarily because you need carbon monoxide as a reductant to remove the oxygen which stubbornly clings to the iron in the ore. And that carbon monoxide is generally produced by coking coal. The cement sector, the ammonia sector, and the plastic sector are each difficult to decarbonize for various different reasons. So if you have green hydrogen as a way of decarbonizing the sector, that then is a positive development. Hydrogen to act as a reductant in iron and steel, hydrogen to act as a customer for CO2, which is inevitably going to be emitted by the manufacturers of cement, ammonia being made with green hydrogen instead of with hydrogen from the steam reforming of methane, and plastics being made from captured CO2 and green hydrogen. The last point is that of public policy support for imports of bulk hydrogen, bulk power fuels. And here there have been a number of key points that have assembled over the years. The first was Japan, way back in 2014, which stated that they would want to import 300,000 tons of hydrogen per year from 2030. And they had a target price of $3 per kilogram. And this will rise to about 2050 to between 5 and 10 million tons per year. And they hope to reduce the target price to $2 per kilogram. The goal is that all hydrogen will be carbon free by about 2040 from their perspective. The second is the European Union. We know that the European Union has been looking at decarbonizing transport for a long time, predating the European Green Deal for quite some time. So the RED version 2 envisions a 14% reduction in CO2 in emissions, in transport at least. The European Green Deal focuses on a number of aspects, but particularly steel and transport. And the hydrogen strategy of the European Union envisages 40 gigawatts of installed electrolyzer capacity in the continent, and a further 40 gigawatts installed in the near neighborhood of Europe. And that is a serious commitment. Germany, on its own, its national hydrogen strategy, has admitted that it will need between 2.7 and 3.3 million tons of green hydrogen per year by 2030. But they're only able to generate a little more than 10% of this volume in country for a number of different reasons. And the remainder will have to be imported from the EU and from renewable energy rich partner countries around the world. And South Africa is one of those. The Netherlands sees they want to maintain the status of the Port of Rotterdam as a large-scale aggregator of liquid and gaseous energy for Northwest Europe. And if we're moving away from carbon, the Dutch want to keep on board and want to make sure that they switch to hydrogen as everybody else does, which is why they are doing significant amount of strategic planning, infrastructure development, and so on for their 45-kilometer long port. Finally, a really new development. The war in Ukraine has really shifted European attitudes as very few other events have in the recent past, leading to the REPower EU project to reduce dependency on Russian gas. Not only moving away from Russian fossil gas to other suppliers' fossil gas, but even increasing their green hydrogen ambition by something in the order of 10 million tons per year, and making it demand earlier. Now, these demands are being and ambitions are being crystallized even as we speak, and so we will be hearing more about that in the oncoming weeks. What do you need to make green hydrogen besides renewable electricity? Obviously, well, you need electrolyzers, and there are three broad classes of electrolyzers. I'm going to not go into great detail. I've tried to keep the y-axis constant, so we are able to compare. But all of them have got high capex. And an electrolyzer with high capex will only make cheap renewable hydrogen if it can run for a number of hours in the year. So your capacity factor is an important matter. In your graphs, what you see here, those solid lines are the maxima and minima, where the maximum capex would be for small facilities in the order of 1 megawatt. And the lower value would be for large facilities, in the order of 20 megawatt. Now, given that the electrolyzer wants to run at high capacity factor, it means that you're going to need both sun and wind, because the sun only shines by day. Now, South Africa's got good sun and wind resources, which means we can produce, we being South Africa, competitive bulk hydrogen and PTX products compared to other coastal countries. And here I'd like to show you this map. And this map is obtained from an IEA document for the G20 in 2019 in Japan. And here you can see that compared to other coastal countries, South Africa does very well. We're only significantly beaten by Chile. But Chile is far from the European market, which gives extra transport costs to them. This means we can create a new export industry to the various customers that I've described. It can also supply the domestic market, and we'll explore that in a little while. Now, the previous map showed you the cost of hydrogen production in country. You're left with gas at atmospheric pressure. You still need to deliver it to your customer. What about the shipping and the conversion costs? How does that change the narrative? Well, we've done some significant modeling looking at South African solar and wind resources. And we can conclude that for islanded power, now by islanded power, I mean all the renewable electricity is only available for the electrolyzer. And if you don't use it for the electrolyzer, you curtail it. And there are various reasons why we do that. But the conclusion we can reach is at large scale, it's clearly more attractive than at smaller scale. And that if you're using wind and PV together in approximately equal quantities, you are able to generate at lower cost. And in terms of electrolyzer technology, if you notice from the previous slide, that alkaline technology gives you a benefit at least for the next decade from a cost perspective. Regarding carriers, hydrogen may be transported most cheaply as ammonia and then reconverted to hydrogen gas compared to the other carrier possibilities. Now, I compare that to liquid hydrogen or LOHC. Of course, if you've got a heat source at the far end that is free, then that changes the economics, but generally very few things in life are free. So hence we are sticking with ammonia for now. And here we give you an idea of costs. Reconverted to gas, i.e. not leaving it as ammonia, South Africa can meet Japanese cost target of $3 a kilogram, or equivalently 2.5 euro per kilogram, before 2030. Remember, that was their target. If we assume a weighted average cost of capital of 3%. Now, that's fairly aggressive concessionary financing. So if you don't have such aggressive concessionary financing giving rise to 6% WACC, we can meet that target by 2040. But if we leave it as ammonia and don't convert it back to gas, we can meet that target at 6% WACC by 2030. So, and this is sort of suggested by the three graphs that you see below there, a range of combinations of electrolyzer technologies and carrier for different weighted average cost of capital. So if we're going to export this hydrogen, clearly you've got to do that from a port. And we as CSIR would like to recommend at least 2 ports. This is not exclusive, but we at least like to put these 2 on the table. Saldanha Bay for the western seaboard for Europe. It's our deepest port at 21.25 meter draft. It's in a really good solar and wind resource region. It's not South Africa's best solar and wind resource region, but hey, our second best sites significantly outperform most others. And we don't really have to think that the Western Cape can be regarded as a second best source. It's good solar and wind. It's also the site of Saldanha steel. And green hydrogen allows you to make not conventional steel, but green steel. And that's the only steel that will pass through the European Union's border adjustment taxes unscathed. And being at the port, obviously, it's an added benefit for the port. Now, it's in the Berg River catchment area. And as you can see from this map from Green Cape's water market intelligence report, we expect severe future water stress there. So we'll be discussing water in the next slide. Looking at the port of Kucha, it's on the eastern seaboard, which suggests it's ideal for exports to Japan and South Korea. It's also a deep water port, accommodating 40-meter draft. It's underutilized. So we recommend that over Durban because Durban is our busiest port. It's in good wind resources and it's not that far from good solar. In actual fact, the Hive Energy plant, which is being planned there, makes use of local solar to good effect. And it's in the Fish to Kashkama catchment, which can be expected to see moderate water stress. So how do we deal with this water stress, seeing that we're going to need water to make the hydrogen? Well, we have an interesting conclusion. Given that we don't want to use fresh water to deprive communities, agriculture, or the environment, it suggests that we must rely on seawater desalination. Now, for most industries, seawater desalination is expensive, particularly for agriculture. But for the hydrogen industry, it's remarkably inexpensive. And this really is a function of how expensive making hydrogen actually is. So the desalination cost component is less than 2 US cents per kilogram of hydrogen produced. Compare that to the target price of $3 US per kilogram. It's less than 1% of the target price. Now, for export, it then means that our hydrogen can be made using water desalinated at or near the port of shipment. We further make a recommendation from a policy environment that is passed with the social license to operate the desalination plants specifically for hydrogen industry be oversized by 300%. You build the extra capex costs into the hydrogen cost, into the hydrogen price, which you then negotiate with the off-taker. And as you've seen, it's not going to greatly affect the price. And this means that the capital repayment is borne by the hydrogen business. During drought, you run the desalination plant at 100% capacity. And the excess water you sell to the local utility at only the electricity cost portion, because the capex is carried otherwise. In times of good rains and full dams, you run the desalination plant at 30% capacity. It's not going to change the amount of people you employ. The amount of staff you employ is going to stay much the same. All that really changes is your electricity consumption and some of your consumables. Assuming you have got a hydrogen export industry at these two ports, how does that incentivize and facilitate other industries? So here we investigated a number of possibilities, and bunker fuel for shipping looked particularly attractive. And I'm sure Adinda is going to refer to this a little bit later, or possibly some of the other speakers. But the two ports of Cape Town and Saldanha Bay, excluding the vessels that pass by the Cape of Good Hope anyway on their way to someone else. I'm talking about the vessels that call at our ports for business reasons. The bunker fuel for those vessels on the journeys that they take to their next port of call for a full year amount to in the order of 500,000 tons per year of green hydrogen. And here I've already excluded all the small vessels, and I've excluded all the vessels that routinely transport fossil fuel. So all the LPG tankers, LNG tankers, and coal bunkers, bulk carriers, because it's unlikely that they will use sustainable fuel if they're transporting fossils. So even with that in mind, this is the large volume of hydrogen which would be required. Now compare that to the export to Japan, for example, where Japan's entire demand is going to be 300,000 tons. If Germany's demand is 3 million tons, and we get maybe 10% of that market at 300,000 tons, it shows the tremendous opportunity presented by maritime shipping. Land-based transport, and as you can see here, ground vehicles at airports, the Praso Metro Rail in Cape Town, we assumed that we replaced the entire locomotive fleet with locomotives that run on hydrogen. It's a really small volume in comparison. The only largest volume is that of AMSA's Saldanha Works, the Saldanha Steel, at 104,000 tons per year of green hydrogen. This gives us a conclusion then that for bunker fuel and for steel, we will need to have dedicated hydrogen production to meet that demand. But the terrestrial transport may well be met and accommodated by hydrogen production for export anyway. So having said all that, what is next? A lot of technical stuff. What's happening in the real world? What's happening in terms of processes? Well, the Hydrogen Society Roadmap was released by DSI. It's been approved by Cabinet and launched in the public. I think it was in February. There's a green hydrogen panel that was set up by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, and that is developing a green hydrogen commercialization strategy. The first hydrogen valley is being set up, connecting Durban and Gauteng via the N3 and Gauteng and Mogalakwena via the N1. And I think we'll be hearing from that later in this session, in the panel session. And the presidency and SASOL are together exploring the creation of a new port, the name of Boegoebaai, in the Northern Cape, just a little bit south of Oranjemund, if I'm correct. And here they're looking at significantly large volumes for export. To date, there isn't much there. So this is an ambitious new plan, a brand new port, brand new renewable infrastructure, desalination infrastructure, and so on. South Africa is receiving a large amount of German support. Firstly, the KfW Development Bank made 200 million euro available for concessionary financing for green hydrogen in South Africa. And CSIR and Meridian Economics assisted in sourcing various different projects which could potentially benefit from that funding. PTX Pathways is a project funded by GIZ, and Marlett's on the call. I'm quite sure she'll have more to talk about that. And our goal here is to compare various different South African ports, as well as some inland sites, regarding hydrogen and PTX production costs, also looking at the local demand for green hydrogen across a number of different sectors, and looking at PetroSA and Sasol in their decarbonisation journey. PetroSA is particularly interesting because, as you know, they have some difficulty because their upstream feedstock supply from their offshore gas fields are running dry. So they have to source commercial methane from international suppliers in US dollars. By converting to using green hydrogen and CO2 from other sources, you can then produce product that can be sold to premium and in addition reduce carbon emissions. Second project is H2SA, and it does a number of different things, but what I'm focusing on here is that it will assist government with respect to policy, regulatory, and strategy alignment, because there are a number of those out there. The EU delegation in South Africa, mentioned by Adinda earlier at the opening of this webinar, has funded 2 hydrogen studies by CSIR, and they are out in the public domain. And if anyone is struggling to access a copy, please give me a call and I will link you up. Most recently, in March, there was a European Union hydrogen study tour. And we were privileged to have on this tour representatives from DMRE, DTIC, Department of Transport, DSI, Presidency, Transnet, the IDC, the European Investment Bank. And we went to go and visit Port of Rotterdam, Port of Antwerp, the European Commission in Brussels, as the Jülich Institute in Germany. Also looked at a hydrogen-powered bus network, or portion of a bus network in the north of France. Lastly, I'd like to point out the World Bank. The World Bank has a project together with the President Climate Commission to do feasibility studies on 3 South African ports, particularly for sustainable bunker fuel. And this obviously leads us to the Climate Bank Declaration. If you don't know about the Climate Bank Declaration, it was one of the outcomes of COP26, where a series of green corridors will be established in the future between pairs of ports for specific cargoes. South Africa, unfortunately, is not a signatory to the Climate Bank Declaration, and therefore it's definitely in our interest that they become a signatory so that we can access this large maritime market. And that is the end of my intro, which hopefully assists our hydrogen panel to have a number of things to discuss.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Thomas. I think you set us up there very nicely with a base to actually continue discussions now and even zoom into a next level. What I would like to do is just to take a moment and introduce our panel for today. It consists of industry experts, and I would say just a reminder to please send us your questions in the Q&A box as we go along. And I have a reminder from my team behind the scenes that not in the chat box, please send it over to the Q&A side. Okay, so it is a delight today to have our panelists here. And over the past few months, we had quite a few conversations or discussions also for ourselves as the Saldanha Bay IDZ and as the Innovation Campus, also trying to make sense of the hydrogen landscape and all of the moving parts. So first up on our panel that I would like to introduce is Marlett Balmer. Marlett represents the GIZ, or more easily known as the German Development Cooperation with South Africa. And Marlett brings with her over 25 years of experience in the renewable energy field. She is currently focused on the South African Green Hydrogen Program as a component manager focused on research, innovation, and capacity building, as well as green hydrogen sector development. Thank you, Marlett, for being here today. Next up is Katrina Abhold. Katrina is the project lead for global opportunities at the Global Maritime Forum. Her main work focuses on collaborating with developing countries to identify and assess opportunities to produce zero-emission fuels to decarbonize international shipping and support a just and equitable transition. Then, very excited to have George with us today. George van Rensburg brings 24 years plus experience. He is currently the managing director of Kirin Energy, a renewable energy company that is focused on solar, biomass, and hydro energy. In the past, George was instrumental in the development and bidding of several renewable energy projects. And I'm quite excited for George to share a little bit more what's happening right under our noses here on the West Coast in terms of hydrogen production. Okay, so let's get the discussion going. My first question that I would like to pose will be to Marlett. Marlett, just starting very much at a high level and viewing the hydrogen ecosystem. If we look at hydrogen policy in Germany and in South Africa, what do you see as the challenges and the opportunities in each country?
Thank you, Adinda. I think I will start with the opportunities. I think if you look at the German policy and also the EU policy, it is very clear. There are clear targets, there are clear policies, there are clear instruments. The Energy Sources Act that was promulgated in 2021 clearly outlined the provision of support strategies and mechanisms for the production of green hydrogen and the use of green hydrogen by industry. It's a very nice, clear statement. Germany wants 5 gigawatts of green hydrogen to be available by 2030, to be followed by an additional 5 gigawatts by 2035. So what we see is also a single policy. The German there's one strategy document. Policies are aligned across sectors, and I think that gives very good clarity and security to potential investors, and also clear direction where they want to see the economy and the energy economy developing. I think also you mentioned it, Thomas, we cannot ignore the impact of the Ukrainian invasion and the war, and what we've seen and the discussions going on is a clear like they're speeding up. They're now talking about reaching the targets much quicker, and yes, there's an impetus from provided by the war. Also to mention just that I think it's very clear that Europe and also Germany's strategies and policies are very much informed by environmental concerns, emission reductions. Whereas if we look now to the South African environment, the main drivers and the concerns would, well, what we see at the moment is definitely around economic growth and job creation. So what would be the opportunities or the benefits in South Africa? Again, Thomas said it all, you know, great resources, great experience. Sasol is a world leader with the Fischer-Tropsch processes, so that says that there is some skills available. Then also there is clearly a commitment. I'm not sure if the echo is from my side. Thomas, your mic is unmuted. I think maybe I'm picking up. Anyway, so there are clear opportunities, and also now to come to the challenges, I think in the German European environment, again alluded to, they have to import. They cannot supply their own demand or the targeted demand from their own production. So they are looking at importation, and which again creates a real opportunity for South Africa. We are part of a global team of countries, I think, that will start competing for that market. There is Brazil, Chile, Morocco, countries that have been engaging with the topic a little bit longer than us, but I still think that we have an excellent opportunity to fulfill some of that demand. In my closing remark, I think in terms of the challenges that we see for the South African community, or to develop this green hydrogen sector, we would definitely need we would definitely need to make sure that we have the right skills. But again, I think the whole conversation around the just energy transition and repurposing some skills that might be at risk, or jobs that might be at risk in the coal sector, that provides a good talking point or a good entry point. We definitely need to convince investors that we are a capable country and that we can support and offer good investment opportunities. So we are upbeat. Thomas, just one addition. Thank you very much for saying that GIZ funded the PTX Pathways, but it's actually the German Ministry for Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. They fund the PTX Pathways project, and H2SA is funded by the Ministry for Economic Cooperation. So I think you see a lot of investor confidence, or at least some confidence, coming forward. But I will stop there and happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Marlett. Marlett, was tying back to some of the objectives that I said at the beginning of the meeting, and perhaps highlighting to some of the things that you've mentioned over and above from Thomas, is that I think there was already an urgency with the energy transition and finding new pathways, but now we're even seeing an acceleration of that. And actually, to also share, we've been also having a little bit of interesting conversations, trying to understand where do we stand as South Africa to some of the countries that you mentioned. We know Brazil, Chile, Morocco, Australia, even our neighbors Namibia is taking a position to also play in the hydrogen market. And some of the sense that we got is that perhaps South Africa is a year or 2 years behind in terms of the planning, but there's still space for us to catch up. I also just really like that you mentioned around the need for a just transition and the need for skills development. And I want to link it back around to the resources that we have as South Africa. When we look at, yes, we do have advantage when it comes to renewables, as well as existing technology by Sasol and Fischer-Tropsch, but we also have an abundance of platinum metal group metals, which also plays quite a significant role in the electrolysis and the fuel stack process. So there's also a play for the mining sector in the hydrogen value chain. Marlett, I do have a follow-up question. And from your perspective, what do you think is needed to scale the hydrogen economy in South Africa?
Adinda, I think you raised the topic, how do we compare with countries like Brazil, Morocco, etc., etc. And I think what we see is that we really need a concerted effort from government towards coordination. And we need to align policies, and we need to have very clear strategies and clear policy statements. And we need to get government departments collaborating towards one goal. I'm not saying that is not taking place, but I think we need to accelerate that. I think the Department of Science and Innovation played a clear leading role with the publication of the Society Roadmap, Hydrogen Society Roadmap. it outlines the need for each government to play its role in terms of its mandate. You know, and although if we talk about our fantastic renewable energy resources that we have, but you know, the reality is, if we talk about green hydrogen, we would probably have to expand the current renewable energy rollout or program like 10 times. That's the reality. And do we have the licensing capacity to do that? You know, I spoke to somebody, and this is not related to renewable energy, but they've been waiting for a water license since 2013. So, and again, I'm not criticizing government. This is the reality. Processes take time. EIAs take time. But if we're serious about saying we want to establish a green hydrogen economy, then we need to also understand that we're going to have to really expand, have more projects, but that would require more licensing, more approvals, etc., etc. So yes, I think the challenge is to get everybody on the same page and agree, yes, this is where we want to go, and then throw all the weight behind that and say, this is what is needed, and fast track it. I think we can do it. I think it is definitely possible, but it's going to take a concerted effort. Thanks.
Super, thanks, Marlett. I love that you mentioned the DSI Society roadmap. I'm actually going to ask our Innovation Campus team just to share the link of that report with everyone. It is, I think, like a very comprehensive view of the role of public sector and how this project or how the industry would trickle down and the role that each needs to play. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thomas, back to you. So I think the question that I have for you, and I know we have already, actually you've already spoken to a lot of it, is why does Saldanha make a good location? But is there anything that you would like to add, just maybe from some of the takeaways there from Marlett?
Okay. I think what makes Saldanha very interesting is the fact not just that it's access to good renewables and that it's a deep water port, but also that it is so close to the business center of Cape Town. You have a metro with a number of demands that you can decarbonize with a hydrogen supply. This is one of the risks. Risk is too strong a word. The delays which will be implicit in the Buchubaya project. It will produce splendid amounts of hydrogen, make no mistake, but its ability to decarbonize other South African sectors will require transport by pipeline, by road transport, by ship, whatever. And these add a level of doubtless we will see that happen. But if you can co-locate a number of things together, you have a hydrogen valley. And this is what DSI is doing with the N3 and the N1, to co-locate demand centers and supply centers so that you can get the whole hydrogen economy moving. Saldanha Bay being, 150 kilometers away from Cape Town, and has a number of interesting industries which it can support, a number of transport nodes. It has some CO2 emitters, and CO2 from there could be very useful for the manufacture of methanol for maritime fuel. And also it is a really large consumer currently of bunker fuel, both Cape Town and Saldanha Bay together. So moving that towards green and sustainable maritime fuel is yet another application of green hydrogen that can be done. When I'm speaking positively with respect to Saldanha Bay and Ngqura, I'm not speaking negatively necessarily of Richards Bay, East London, and Buchubaya, but I am rejoicing in the fact that you have these deep water ports that are available, that have capacity, and you have these ancillary other industries around it which will be able to benefit. There's an interesting comment that is raised by Nadej Hopman of the European Investment Bank. She likes to speak of an NPV of jobs, and I've not really heard this as an idea. Now, you can do 200,000 jobs a decade from now, or you can do 50,000 jobs next year. Which is better? That's a hard argument to really evaluate. But if you are able to supply fewer jobs but much sooner, you can catalyze other events. So they should not be sneezed at. It's not just that the largest opportunity, but potentially with a longer lead time, looks most attractive. If you have got a shorter lead time for a smaller opportunity, that also looks good. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, no, it does. Thanks, Thomas. I really like the NPV of jobs. Yeah, it's quite a different way of thinking of it, and something I'm sure that we'll reference quite a bit going forward. I also particularly like the mention of, like, you mentioned the hydrogen valley up north, but if we connect the dots in Saldanha and between Saldanha and Cape Town, it certainly could also be a next hydrogen valley. Great stuff. I do want to, Katrina has been waiting to share a bit with us on the work that they have been doing as the Global Maritime Fund. And we're starting now to zoom in. We've heard now about the bigger landscape. We're hearing about Saldanha. And I now specifically want to zoom into Saldanha Bay Port and maritime fuels. Katrina, why do you see Saldanha Bay Port as a good location to create a hub for zero carbon fuels?
Hi, Adinda. I think as I've been hearing from everyone else, it seems that it's almost a question of why not Saldanha Bay. And I think from my experience and from the work that we've been doing as part of the P4G Getting to Zero Coalition, our work has really looked into scoping the opportunities within South Africa to produce scalable zero emission fuels such as green hydrogen and green ammonia for the purpose of decarbonizing shipping. And really, when we have been digging into it, Saldanha Bay is one of the strongest business opportunities that we've uncovered. And there's some aspects to it, some of which have already been covered, such as the proximity to renewable energy resources, particularly solar, offshore and onshore wind. It's clear that, and quite importantly, establishing production of green fuel nearby, the use or the deployment of it is a clear cost savings. So it's really important for making sure that the competitive price of the green carbon or the green hydrogen that it's being produced is taken into consideration, and having that space, having that proximity to renewable energy makes it very important for any sites that are looking into developing this. That also comes with, as we have noted, space. Saldanha does have quite a bit of space for expansion and for development. It's been clear that there's hectares of land that has been zoned for use. We also know, and as Thomas mentioned, the synergies with local industries is extremely important and relevant, having that community nearby. This isn't just local industries such as the development of green steel, but also specifically for vessels. So Saldanha Bay has quite a bit of bulk carriers that are leaving the port. Now, larger vessels, bulk carriers in particular, container ships are good candidates for the new fuels that are coming out with regards to green hydrogen and green ammonia. It's unclear yet how the maritime industry will go, but all of the research is suggesting that green hydrogen and green hydrogen derived fuels are pretty much the best candidates for our future decarbonization for shipping. So zero emission vessels will need these fuels. And as been noted, Saldanha Bay and its proximity to Cape Town really does provide a good demand center for producing green fuels in Saldanha. In addition, we've also noted the synergies with mining companies. There's quite a few hard to hard to abate sectors, as Thomas mentioned, where the reduction requirement to reduce scope 3 emissions is something that a lot of companies are looking to address. And one of the synergies that's quite clear is mining companies that already use gray hydrogen and need to switch over. And so we're looking into those synergies as well, and having the proximity for Saldanha and a few other ports within South Africa, and it's pretty much heavy mining industries, is a great candidate. And then I think lastly is, and something maybe not to be underestimated, is the innovation campus and the skills. You need people working in these new areas. You need skills, you need job creation. And having the innovation campus at Saldanha means that there's already a leg in this world for training and development. It means that there's already scope for accepting new training and capacity building for the soft and the social skills needed for all parts of this sector. That's hands-on training that's needed for the handling of these fuels, as well as for the safety and environmental protection. So I think that overall, those are the kind of the few areas that I think are important for why Saldanha Bay is a good location for a bunkering hub.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Katrina. So for those that know me well, I really like to join dots. So while I'm listening to Katrina, it's more than just establishing a green bunker storage in Saldanha. If we think of the bulk carriers that comes to the Saldanha Bay port, Saldanha Bay port is one of the biggest exporters of commodities, specifically iron ore and manganese. May that be destined to China or to different countries. But there is an opportunity for us to establish shipping corridors, which makes a circle back to what Thomas has mentioned in terms of the Clouderbank Agreement. And then also tying into, there's so many spin-off opportunities also that this could bring. When we think of the Saldanha Bay IDZ, our mandate is to build the maritime services industry, such as ship building and ship repair, and bringing more freight to the area, specifically attracting them by green bunker fuel or derivatives rather. There's also the possibility of a spin-off of or stimulating the existing industry. So it's pretty cool. Thanks, Katrina. I do have a second question though, and this is, let's have a go at it. Considering the infrastructure that may be needed, or the fuels infrastructure, what is needed in the Saldanha Bay port, or maybe more broadly, what is needed for zero carbon fuel infrastructure for any port that wants to transport hydrogen?
Now, this is not an easy question. Happy to have a stab at it. It's clear that the new fuels will be and need to be handled differently than traditional fossil fuels. If you're talking, depending on the form of the fuels, they can either be gases or liquids. Now, mostly with regards to bunkering infrastructure, there is quite a bit of emphasis on the use of green methanol and green ammonia for large ships. This is due to the higher energy density of these fuels, which makes loading of this fuel onto the large vessels more practical. So they don't use as much space as loading tons of hydrogen, only to get the same amount of distance as loading smaller amounts of methanol and ammonia. So these are really already kind of what the industry is looking towards right now. Ammonia engines have not been fully developed yet. They are still being, at least according to MAN-ES, the expectation to have an ammonia engine is going to be around 2025. That is to be determined. There are already methanol engines out in practice already. But in order for a port to handle these new fuels and in order to handle bunkering of these fuels, you're going to need most of the investment on the land side of your infrastructure. It's not going to necessarily be on the ship, it's going to be on the land. So that's upwards of 80% of investment will be needed on land. And that includes partially in port, so bunkering infrastructure, storage infrastructure. You need pipelines and transport infrastructure. And depending on where you're actually producing these fuels, that includes the production facilities, electrolyzers. We've also discussed the need for of clean water desalination plants, not to mention the upstream renewable energy itself. So you're talking about massive infrastructure requirements. So with regards to specifically the port, it really depends on the capacities of what the port has. Now, Saldanha Bay already has infrastructure to handle fossil fuels, and I believe there's also infrastructure handled for liquefied natural gas. Now, there's the question of how do you retrofit existing infrastructure in order to handle these new fuels? That's something that's still being discussed. But of course, there is discussions and there has been research on what is best, what infrastructure is best to use for the transport and storage of green hydrogen. So it's been said that hydrogen production is more cost effective to transport by pipeline than by electricity. So again, having the production of your green hydrogen nearby the port is ideal. Pipeline capacities, it makes sense. They have larger capacities than cables. So pipeline capacities can handle about 15 to 20 gigawatts, while cable capacities usually are 1 to 4 gigawatts. And then pipelines also avoid grid integration issues. So if you don't need to necessarily have an integrated grid, especially if that's challenging depending on your geography, you can have isolated grids with connected pipelines that enable the production of green hydrogen. This has been suggested by a few studies as well to have or to tackle also some energy infrastructure issues in various countries. I would also then say too that pipelines, if there is an existing natural pipeline or natural gas pipeline system already established, that can be retrofitted at a lower cost to handle the transport of green hydrogen. I think that's something to take into consideration as well with regards to retrofitting ports that can already handle natural gas versus new ports like Fugabai, which everything will need to be built new and fresh. So there is some consideration to be had about cost of retrofitting versus cost of building new, also environmental considerations. But for Saldanha Bay, this type of infrastructure, both at the port and also its connections nearby, either to the production facility as well as to connections to renewable energy sources, is going to be key in the future.
Katrina, I'm smiling. At the outset, you said it was maybe a bit difficult to answer, but I think that was a very rich and insightful feedback that you've given us there, and much food for thought. I'm quite sure the engineers in the room might have a few technical discussions after this, just based on what you shared. Thank you. I then want to move on to George. George, I first want to start off just to understand in terms of the research, development and innovation landscape in South Africa, where do you see are we leading in this space, and who are the key role players?
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. If I can just give a brief background about us, we are energy IPP developer. We've developed a couple of sites. We're successful in the REAP rounds. And we looked at hydrogen as a couple of years ago as the next thing we need to do. And we partnered up to partly answer your question with University of the Western Cape, which is part of government's effort to do research on hydrogen. and the CIMAC department at the University of the Western Cape, and subsequently with them, with a collaboration, we've put up the first green hydrogen pilot plant in Vredendal, in the Western Cape, the northern part of the Western Cape. We are up and running. We've just completed it. What's the right word I'm looking for? We just executed the project about a month and a half ago. We are producing green hydrogen. According to my what I know is that I think we are the first in Africa to produce green hydrogen, although it's in a very small quantity. We are extending the proof of concept into storage and a little bit of mobility as well. But to answer your question as well, is that I think government, we have 3 universities that government has funded for research purposes, and it's UWC, UCT, and I think in the University of the Northwest, and that's all part of the HISA program. Probably everybody knows about that. So what we as a developer and business people see, and I can agree with all the panelists, all their views and all the inputs. We have a commercial project about 20 kilometers from site, where we have very good solar, we have abundance of water, we don't have to desalinate, and that's a 5 to 10 megawatt project. We want to be the first to market in about 16 to 18 months. We are busy raising the finance for that. And then we have secured land. We also believe that Saldanha is a crucial piece of the puzzle. And we as business people believe you must walk before you run. So we're doing it in stages. First proof of concept, then a 10 megawatt commercial project. And then we've just secured land with about 70% permitted, very close to Saldanha, out of the mist belt, with good renewable potential and water sources as well, which is probably be about a 400 megawatt project. So we believe it to start a hydrogen valley in the Western Cape on the N7. And yes, so we are doing what we do, and we believe in that. There's a lot of talk, and if we believe we have to execute. So the proof of concept's up and running. Everyone's welcome to come have a look at it. And that partly, I have to say that I have to commend the University of the Western Cape for all the input and all the help on that. And for us as a business, it's very nice to work with institutions like UWC, where you have all the know-how and all the brain trust on this. So that's what we want to do. So we want to concentrate as an energy company on the hydrogen valley in the Western Cape. That's where we have our sites, and which we develop and which we are spending money on. I don't know if that answered you completely, Adinda.
George, I think it has actually answered many questions. So actually, you've both answered in terms of the research and development space where we're leading, and then also giving the audience a bit of a view on the pilot project up in Vredendal, which we're very excited about, that it is in the Western Cape and that it is already up and running. I do want for the audience, just for interest's sake, is that our Department of Science and Innovation has prioritized hydrogen as a strategic area since 2007 already. And that's how they establish HISA and prioritize research around hydrogen amongst the universities. It is quite a pocket of excellence that we have, and will stand us in good stead for the next few weeks, months, and years to come, to truly bring the industry up and running. George, before I move on to Marlett, do you have any last comments for us, or any last thoughts that you want to leave us with?
Yes, thank you. I think, as I've mentioned, everyone's welcome to come have a look at the proof of concept. We are going forward at a rapid start to be the first producers of a commercial green hydrogen in about 16 to 18 months in the site at at Reinsdorp. That's where the commercial site is. So we are very excited about it. We want to work closely with Saldanha. We believe that Saldanha is the answer. Personally, I might get crucified for this. I believe Boegoebaai is maybe, if we are lucky, we might see it in our lifetime. I've got doubts about that, but that's neither here nor there. So we believe that Saldanha is a very strategic ports, and that's where we align our assets for the future, for this economy in the future. So Saldanha and the Western Cape is what we see the way forward as a IPP.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, George. Then I need to wrap up. I'm getting some reminders from our team behind the scenes. Marlett, full circle back to you. What are the community benefits that could be realized through the development of a green hydrogen economy? Oh, Marlett, you're still on mute. Oh, it still seems to be on mute. Let me see it. There we go. Oh no, I think we lost sound on your side. It's unmuted. I can confirm. Seems it's one of those
so
gremlins.
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. Adinda, I think where I would like to start is just to say that we really have an excellent opportunity here to also learn from the past. I think if we look at the REI4P program in South Africa, they have made great strides and gave us so many excellent examples how to structure community benefits, but we also learned a lot of lessons from that program. So I think we know that it's difficult, but I think it can be done. We've got very good examples on how to improve. I think from a GIZ perspective, we also want to address not only community benefits, but also environmental benefits, and just more keeping in the just energy transition topic, to make sure that the just is just. And I think there we have lots of opportunities to look at who benefits, how can we assist, for example, small SMMEs, female-owned businesses, how can we open up participation in the economy to make sure that it is just and it does benefit more than, or we can make it better, let me rather put it that way. But we see, for example, potential benefits for communities. I've mentioned before the skills. We see skills and capacity building and training as a real offer. We know that, again, green hydrogen is green because of the renewable energy. We know that renewable energy can absorb limited skills, but those skills, they are not all high-level skills. It can also be medium skills, and we have the opportunity to train for that. And then I think also looking at community ownership in projects. There are really good examples, community trusts, community shareholding, etc. So I do think that there are numerous ways, and what I like is that we have a lot of good examples to learn from. Thanks.
Thank you, Marlett. Brilliant. I'm going to move us along to the Q&A session. For everyone, we'll take maybe like 3 to 4 questions if time allows, and then I'll wrap us up. But also, if we don't get to your question today, our team will attend to it and we will reply via email. So just to give you that comfort in case we don't get to your question. So, and to our team, I think, let me see the first question that comes up. Let me see. I see a few has been answered. Okay, I think here's a question from Kumotso. With regards to new entrants, how do you address access to market, access to funding, and access to capacity development, particularly for women, youth, and people living in disabilities, shortly transformation? Marlett, I know it's a little bit to what you have spoken to. Do you have some any additional thoughts or some practical tips on how new entrants can get support?
Yes, I think what we as GIZ can offer is equitable access to information. So that's very important to us. So whatever we do is always in the public domain, and we would like to make sure that people have access to information. For example, good information around potential investment, funding opportunities, and also off-taking opportunities. So that's something we are working on to put in place information portals that can be accessed equitably. We have a specific objective to look at female participation, not only as workers in projects, but also as business owners and entrepreneurs. And for that, we look at specific training and capacity building opportunities for women and female entrepreneurs specifically. We also would like to encourage the participation of women also in the research sector, and we have specific activities in mind. I must also just say our program is very new. We haven't really done a lot. There's a lot of planning at the moment, but we are, for example, looking at offering bursaries in the through the HISA network, and encouraging collaboration, exposing female researchers to international researchers, and encouraging international collaboration. And then I think a real issue is the close lying communities. But there, I mean, it's a very detailed topic, but all I can say is that we are looking at lessons learned from the renewable energy REI4P program, and I think that we have a lot to learn from there. Thanks.
Thank you, Marlett. Thomas?
I just wanted to contribute there. I agree with what Marlett is saying. Also, just to envisage what this could look like. If we're going to be exporting all these volumes of hydrogen, ideally, we don't want a whole bunch of private companies going for wherever they think it makes sense. Then it becomes a complete hodgepodge and there isn't any sort of coordination. However, you don't necessarily want the state to do everything either. So it's still to be emerged, what is the role of the state and what is the role of the private sector? We can envisage that at very least, we will see reverse auctions, much the same way as the REI4P, not only for the renewable capacity, but also for the electrolyzer capacity. We can imagine that they would be administered by an organization, if not NERSA, an organization like NERSA. And I would imagine that government would want to see certain priorities emerge out of these projects. So this would be community involvement. This would be assistance for local education. And you can imagine a whole bunch of other areas. And of course, given, as I mentioned earlier, about desalination and water availability, we can anticipate a drier environment than we currently have, particularly along the coasts. Having extra desalination capacity means that you have water available for communities and smaller industry that would not have been available otherwise.
Okay, super. Thanks, Thomas. I'm going to move on to the next question. At this time, it's from Apalele. Since South Africa is a developing country and some of competing countries are a bit advanced in terms of technology than us, will that be a challenge or not? Perhaps Thomas or George, if you would like to have a go at this.
I'll give a quick go, and George can obviously welcome to contribute. We've got a very good primer here in the REI444. Before that began, there were a few companies that did some solar work, not that much in wind. And we didn't have to develop a wind technology or a PV technology, but what we did need to do was to develop a market. With the development of the market and of subsequent bidding rounds, more and more companies entered South Africa. It was a requirement for them to set down roots, a requirement for them to do technology transfer, to develop a supply chain. And we will see the same thing in hydrogen. And again, this is a policy issue, and it's one within government control. We would imagine that as these bids happen, it's a negotiation between what government would like to see happen and what the off-takers would like to see happen, what the Germans and the Europeans and the Japanese. I would imagine this will be a negotiated set of outcomes, but it won't be a complete free-for-all. The 200 million euro made available by KfW, that was in a bit of a policy vacuum, but I can imagine we'll start stitching that up.
Okay, brilliant. Thomas, thanks, Thomas. Katrina, do you want to add on?
Yeah, just to say that some of the other work that we've been doing as the Global Maritime Forum and behalf of the P4G Getting to Zero project, we've also looked into the opportunities to develop green hydrogen and power-to-X fuels in Indonesia and Mexico. We've also been in communication with Morocco, Chile, and other countries in their opportunities. And I have to admit that although there is quite a bit of interest everywhere on this topic, I would actually say that South Africa has been very well positioned in leading this. I do believe that there's quite a bit of advanced political understanding, commitment. Having a hydrogen roadmap in and of itself is also a great signal. Not every country has that. And I believe that despite South Africa, quote unquote, being a developing country and behind, is actually is ahead of certain other countries as well. So I would just kind of maybe mitigate and say that South Africa might not seem to be as far behind as what the fears may persist, but instead actually has quite a bit of the base grounds for moving quickly on this front.
Great stuff. Marlett?
Thanks, Adinda. Just to add one more perspective is that what I've been told is that we must just remember that South Africa is much closer to the markets in Europe than countries like Brazil and Argentina, we do have certain advantages. So yeah, just to add that. Thanks.
Okay, brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. What I'm going to do is maybe just have a quick look at the panelists and see if there's any last contribution you want to make, just agnostic of questions. We'll address the rest of the questions via email. Just quickly seeing if there's a last show of hands, that anything that you would like to add on that may have sparked. Otherwise, I'll wrap us up and there may be a minute or two spare before the next engagement. Okay, good stuff. So what I would like to do is just to go back to the objectives that we stated, that we hope that today that you take home with you a broad overview of what the hydrogen value chain is, the opportunities that it brings to Saldanha, the benefits that we have as South Africa to seize this opportunity. In terms of timelines, that there is a sense of urgency to execute. And as we should not see ourselves as competing regionally within South Africa, but that we are competing with markets outside of South Africa. And that I think most important to get this across the line is that we as Team South Africa will have to collaborate, integrate, and coordinate more than we ever have done before to bring this off the ground and to build a whole new industry. What we're going to do now is just a last poll that will pop up on your screen. Just to, let's quickly do that to our magic team. And while they set up the poll, I would like to just do a quick round of thank yous. The first thank you, just a big thank you to our speakers today. You have been fantastic, and we're looking forward to walk the path with you in the weeks and months to come. Immense knowledge, passion, and also wanting to execute. Then a big high five to our team behind the scenes that's running with the webinar logistics. Well done. And then a bigger thank you to our audience today for showing up, engaging, and taking away something new. I do realize that 90 minutes is quite a bit of a tall task from one's day, but I'm sure you find it as valuable and will set you up for future discussions. Now, we look forward to see you all at our next webinar in June, and please extend the invite, follow us on our LinkedIn and pages and websites. And as soon as this recording is ready, we'll also share it via our social media platforms and via email. Then take care and wish you all a happy Tuesday. Thank you, everyone.